Sorry about that. Have to make a quick run.
All right, we are live. Andre, go ahead and kick us off.
Welcome to the Fair Chance for Housing Virtual Town Hall. Really excited to be here today. If you would like a Spanish translation, please call 929-205-6099. The meeting ID is 825-3091-5976. Press the pound button when it asks for participant ID. The passcode is 617774. Again, welcome everyone to the Fair Chance for Housing Virtual Town Hall. We're going to turn this over now to our dear colleague and friend, one of our panelists, none other than Reverend Wendy Calderón. And so she's going to obviously share in Spanish what I just read to you in terms of the Spanish translation. Reverend Wendy?
Buenas, ¿me puedo escuchar? Can you hear me, guys? Yes, great. Bueno, si usted quiere escuchar en español, usted tiene que llamar a 929-205-6099. El número de ID de reunión es 825-3091-5976. Usted tiene que presiona la tecla número 9 cuando se pide Participant ID. Y el passcode es 617774. Gracias.
Thank you so much for that, Reverend Wendy. And obviously we'll be hearing from you later on, and we're excited about that. So let me introduce myself, as we're now, and you have now joined this Fair Chance for Housing Virtual Town Hall. My name is Andre Ward, and I serve as the Associate Vice President for the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy at the Fortune Society. And today I'm going to be the moderator for this town hall meeting, and I'm really excited. We have some really esteemed leaders, those impacted, those who are impacting, and we want to make sure that you, as a participant who has joined this town hall, pay real close attention, be open to learn some things, and in the end, we'll give some instruction on how to pass this and move this stuff along. So I'm going to give you a brief overview this evening of the Fair Chance for Housing campaign. The Fair Chance for Housing campaign is led by the John Jay College Institute for Justice and Opportunity and the Fortune Society, with over 80 supporting organizations and over 300 campaign members who believe that housing is a human right, including for people with convictions. The campaign is currently working to pass the Fair Chance for Housing Act, Intro 2047, in the New York City Council, which would prohibit housing discrimination on the basis of arrest or conviction record in New York City. This evening is a chance to learn about the Fair Chance for Housing campaign and get your questions answered about the bill and what it would mean for you. We'd like to thank all of our co-sponsors, as it's critically important that we have sponsorship to continue to move this stuff along. We want to thank the Brooklyn Defender Service, the Coalition for the Homeless, Common Justice, Exodus Transitional Community, Faith Communities for Just Reentry, the Fortune Society, Freedom Agenda at the Urban Justice Center, John Jay College Institute for Justice and Opportunity, the Legal Aid Society, Mental Health Project at the Urban Justice Center, and we also want to thank the Osborne Association. Some housekeeping rules before we get this started, because I'm really, really excited, as I'm sure many, many of you are. Again, if you would like Spanish translation, please call 929-205-6099. The meeting ID is 876-1784-1048. Just press the pound button again when it asks for the participant ID. I'll say it a bit slowly. If you haven't followed me, I'll repeat it again. If you would like Spanish translation, please call 929-205-6099. The meeting ID is 876-174-1048. Just press pound again when it asks for participant ID. Reverend Wendy, would you like to read it in Spanish again?
Sure. Si usted quiere escuchar en español, llama a 929-205-6099. El número de reunión es 825-3091-5976. Presiona la tecla número 9 cuando se pida Participant ID y su passcode es 617774. Gracias.
Gracias, Reverend Wendy. And to continue on with our housekeeping, because it's important, we want to make sure that all groups are included. We talk about our Latinx community, our Black community, all other communities are able to participate in this. We wanted to make sure that our Latinx community had Spanish translation. So some more housekeeping. You can turn on your live auto captioning on the bottom of the Facebook Live video. Click on the gear icon and turn on auto captions if you need them. It's fairly accurate, but it's a machine, so it may be occasionally incorrect. I'll also ask the panelists to speak slowly and clearly to help with the auto captioning and Spanish translation. Another housekeeping is you can add your questions and comments in the Facebook Live chat next to the video at any given time. If you don't have a Facebook account, you can email your questions to Z Johnson, that's ZJOHNSON at jjay.cuny.edu. Again, if you'd like to email your questions because you don't have Facebook, you can simply do so by sending your questions to ZJOHNSON at jjay.cuny.edu. We'll put this email in the Facebook chat for you to copy as well. We'll also try to get as many questions as we can. If you don't get your question answered, we'll provide contact info to follow up after the event. The other thing, you can also join the conversation on Twitter by following FAIRHOUSING_NYC and using the hashtags Fair Chance for Housing, Virtual Town Hall 2021. Finally, the event will run until 7:15 p.m. and it's being recorded and will be saved on Facebook and Instagram after the live event. So those are just some housekeeping rules. And now I want to go over the agenda because we're getting really close to the point that we all came here for, to learn, to hear from experts and leaders and impacted people, and to walk away excited and inspired to join this coalition and this work of ending discrimination in housing. So a brief overview of agenda. About 20 minutes of panelist presentation. Each panelist will get 3 to 4 minutes to explain why this issue is important to their life and work and why they support the Fair Chance for Housing Act. There'll be about 10 minutes of questions from each panelist, or rather 10 minutes of questions from me to each of the panelists. Then there'll be about 25 minutes of audience Q&A, which will include questions that were submitted during registration and questions that come up in the Facebook Live chat or email. At the very end, we'll share some ways to get involved and take action as well. So How to add questions and comments. Just some brief instructions on that. Again, you can add your questions and comments in the Facebook live chat next to the video. If you don't have a Facebook account, again, you can simply email your questions to Z Johnson, that's ZJOHNSON at jjay.cuny.edu. Now, the exciting part. We want to introduce our panelists. And I've been waiting so long because we've all been meeting for the last week or two up to this point, and I wanted to make sure that we got this right and like talking to the panelists and learning about them. So now I want you to learn about them as the listening audience. So they'll take about the 3 or 4 minutes to explain why they support the Fair Chance Housing Act, and we'll seek to keep them to that so that we can move it along. Our first panelist is Devon Nash. Devon is a longtime Fair Chance for Housing campaign member. He graduated in 2019 from my college, where I'm an alum at, Medgar Evers College, with a degree in psychology, and is currently a mental health advocate.
Yes.
And we're excited about that. He was released from prison in 2015 and began subletting a room from a friend. But when the landlord conducted a background check, he was immediately evicted. For 3 years now, he has been homeless. He has called real estate agents, filled out applications, paid for non-refundable background checks, put down deposits, and met with landlords. His op-ed about his experience was featured in the Gotham Gazette, and we'll link you to that in the Facebook chat as we move along in this discussion. So Devon, talk to us, right, about why you support the Fair Chance Housing Act. And then I'll introduce our next speaker. Devon?
Yes, can you hear me?
I do, and thank you so much for joining this town hall and sharing your experience and your passion about supporting the Fair Chance Housing Act. Devon?
Thank you. That was a very good synopsis of what I have going on. Countless times, I mean, when it first started out as when I came home, I went to, in 2015, January 2015, I went to Fortune Society because I was having a difficult time finding employment. And so they found me a job, and what I was making, because it was in New Jersey, was $11 an hour. And I was making commission, and that was not enough. So fast forward, I had the job and I was paying for the room. When the landlord came, it was a house. And so when the landlord came, he didn't know who I was because it was a friend who referred me, and he lived out of state. So as long as he was getting the money for the apartment, he didn't really care. But as soon as he met me, he was like, "Oh, I don't know who you are." So I had to give him all my information, and he did a background check. And then he says, "Oh no, you're a felon. I'm in the service. I have guns around. You can't be here." And so he went to the process of evicting me, and we went to court, and he claimed that, oh, it was a house, he was moving back to New York and he needed his house. So the court sided with him and gave me until August of 2017. I found another place. In the process, I was going through real estate after real estate. I was paying anywhere from $50 to $100 for the background check. I probably lost about $1,200 in total. For this background check is non-refundable. They were doing these background checks and they kept saying, no, you're not qualified, you're not qualified. So finally they sent me to somewhere else, and the guy says, well, there's really not much you can do, Mr. Nash. I suggested you and your nephew go into a family shelter because there's nothing we can do for you. And so, January of 2018, that's what I did. And I've been here. It cost the city $6,319.04 per month to house my nephew and I in a one-room hotel. We've been there. We've been moved around about maybe 6 times, and I can't even begin to tell you what that does to the psyche. But now the last place, it's across the street from a cemetery, and there's nothing else around. It's Long Island City on the outskirts on Van Dam. And I'm telling you, there's no stores, there's no nothing. And I've just been there for the last, going on 2 years now, and nothing, absolutely nothing. It's roadblock after roadblock. And I understand that a lot of the issues stem from, I wrote a lot of things down. but it stems from where landlords are able to actually warehouse apartments to keep people from getting in there, and what that does, and then okay, so now another thing that I'm having an issue with is these organizations that put up all this money. So right now the city spends per month, because it's 56,000 900 and some odd thousand people per month. So it costs roughly, because I did the math, at $3,159 per person, and there are 56,000. So that comes to, it's a crazy figure too, and this is per month.
Sure.
Yeah, that comes to, let me find that. Hold on one second.
Sure.
Yeah, that comes to $179,615,552 per month that the city HPD pays out just for the homeless. The exact number is 56,849, and this is according to the Coalition for the Homeless, which did its survey in December 2020, and this was the findings. Based on the New York City shelter system. So just with that figure alone, you would think there's over 15,000 apartments available in the city, but yet it would cost $2,500 at max. That would save the city if they was to just, and another point, since 2013, when, I don't really like to name names, but he's in office. His name is Stephen Banks, and he heads the homeless service. And he's been there from 2013. And from 2013 to today, the number used to be 69,000. So he's bragging about that 15,000 has found apartments in his time. But what he's really not saying is that equals to about 136 people per month. Wow. Out of 4,117 vouchers that are issued each month. Only 117 actually get apartments, and he's actually happy about that. That it's, the number is dwindling, but look, I mean, at what cost? Now, see, the funny thing is, when the money, let's say they say, okay, it's $3,159, so they have a budget every 90 days. So at the end of the year, when the money that they didn't allocate, because let me tell you, they're not spending all that money on us at all. So what they do is that money gets reallocated to other projects, or sometimes as bonuses for the workers. Now, the funny thing is with the, and I don't mean to take up so much time, but I did a lot of research on this. The funny thing is with the, with Stephen Banks, he sends these contracts to contractors who send it out to subcontractors, and they send it out to subcontractors. So by the time it gets to the actual people that need the money, we get roughly about 6 cents on every dollar. So 94 cents goes out the window before it actually gets to us.
Wow, and I want to hold you there, right, Devon? Yeah. Because you just gave a ton of information. And before we go to our next panelist, I just want to acknowledge the fact that you've actually been harmed, right? Like psychically, right? Because
you've
been deprived of access to a natural kind of fundamental right of housing, right? And so I want to hold that there for a minute, and then I want to transition to
hold on. Next... Before you say that, just to piggyback off of what you said, John Cullen did a report. It's called the Universe 25, and what he did was, this was in 1970. He took some rats. He took 4 males and 4 females, and he built them a colony. And in 59 days, it was over 2,220 rats. And don't you know, they did a report on, which they didn't publish, but they did a report on the psychological effects of this. And they use that same report today from 1970. And so you know what's going on here. So, I didn't mean to really, I just wanted to put that out there.
No, we understand, Devon, and it's unconscionable. And that's why the Fair Chance Housing Act needs to be passed. And this is why we're having this town hall. I want to transition now to our next panelist, one of the leaders in the space, a person that obviously is involved in affecting meaningful systems change in different levels, and certainly represents women in who've had like incarcerated experiences and are leaders in the work and space. And it's none other than our colleague, Reverend Sharon White-Harrigan. Reverend Sharon White-Harrigan is the executive director of the Women's Community Justice Association. The Women's Community Justice Association, WCJA, is a gender-specific, trauma-informed advocacy for justice agency that uplifts and amplifies the voices of women who are experts through their life experience and their efforts. Prior to WCJA and leading Beyond Rosie's 2020 campaign, Reverend Sharon was the program director and clinical director of a temporary residence for formerly incarcerated women at the Women's Prison Association, and she was the director of other housing programs specifically for women who were directly impacted. Reverend Sharon Harrigan draws upon her expertise as a licensed social worker, a survivor of violence, and 11 years of incarceration. Reverend Sharon Harrigan White, thank you so much for joining us. Talk to us about why the Fair Chance Housing Act is important to you and why you're here.
Well, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for having me. It's very important to me. It's important to me because I have firsthand experience of housing discrimination. My husband and I are both previously incarcerated, and because of our record, we were denied housing. We were denied an apartment, although we had all of the other criteria is met, right? We had great credit scores. We had a little money in the bank. We had money to put down. We had money for the broker. And unfortunately, because we both had a record, we were denied housing. And because of that, it was just very disempowering. It was disappointing, and it was definitely discouraging to even go through that. And it was re-traumatizing because I felt like, I did 11 years, my husband did almost 16 years, and we did our time, and it came out. And to be denied in that way, right, only because we had a record, we are not our record. And so it felt like what was a sentence that we completed, it seemed like it was still, it was now a life sentence, right? This is something that's going to continuously be held over our head. The ability to have stable life starts with stable housing. And I think it's important that, to know that to have stable housing brings economic and social benefits. It means safety, it means dignity, it means ownership. This is our space and place, right? It also helps to reduce recidivism, right? For men and women. If you have a place to live, if you have somewhere to go that's your own, you tend to have ownership over this space. So you're not going to really do as much of anything to jeopardize that, right? Because you work so hard to get where you are. This impacts so much more than people with convictions. Nearly half of all children in the United States, about 33 million to 36.5 million, have at least one parent with a criminal record. So this campaign, this act, this Fair Chance for Housing Act, it will help reduce barriers to housing so that people and their families, right, have stable homes that can interrupt these intergenerational cycles of poverty and homelessness.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that, Reverend Harrigan White. And then you talk about this idea of eliminating barriers. And you and your husband obviously served the time that you did, and now there's another judgment that occurs, right? Without good reason at all, especially when there's a clear demonstration like any other citizen that you qualify and are eligible to pay for the home that you're looking to live in. And so that's why the Fair Chance for Housing Act is so important, to eliminate those barriers, right? To hold landlords accountable, to treat people with decency and humanity, and give them an opportunity to live a life of contribution, which oftentimes starts with having a home to live in. We want to transition, and we'll circle back to you, Reverend White-Harrigan. We're going to transition to our next panelist. And our next panelist also is someone who is deeply committed to this work, demonstrates leadership in countless ways to amplify the need to access housing and not be discriminated against by landlords because of a person's justice history. And who I'm talking about is none other than Hilton and Webb. Hilton is a longtime Fair Chance for Housing campaign member. He has a bachelor's degree in history, earned in Attica Correctional Facility from Canisius College, where he graduated summa cum laude. He is currently a student at Lehman College's Selective Masters of Social Work program, where I'm an alum at, and I see Reverend Harrigan, we graduated with our master's degree together from Lehman College. And so he graduates in May of 2021. He got permission from his professor to miss part of his class to be with us this evening. And we're grateful to his professor. We also know that's also his right to do that, because housing is a critical part of his life to be able to even go to school. And so he is also currently interning in substance use inpatient residence in the Bronx. Nevertheless, a 20-year-old conviction has kept him from finding an apartment of his own. And he has been living in the Fortune Society's supportive housing since his release. His story was featured in the City and State New York and the New York Daily News, and we'll link that in the chat, this Facebook chat, as we go along. Hilton, thank you so much for joining this town hall. Like, why? Why have you joined us this evening? And why is the Fair Chance Housing Act so important to you?
Well, thank you very much, Andre, and good evening, everyone. To be perfectly honest, housing is critical to me because it affects me. I mean, I got involved because I was critically impacted by the inability to find housing. I don't have a story like Andre. I don't have a story like Reverend Sharon. My story is a story of blessings in some ways. I mean, I came out of prison in 2017 and went to the Bellevue shelter, spent one night in there and realized that the street would be far preferable. And a friend of mine said, you know, you got to go to the Fortune Society. So I went to the Fortune Society, and I mean, they have I'm living in their housing now, but at the time they didn't have any space. So I ended up, they referred me to a shared living situation, which was fine. But eventually I made it to Fortune Society's Academy in Harlem. And that allowed me, and this is the importance of housing. Without this place that I'm living now, I would not be in college. I would not be pursuing my master's degree. I would not be pursuing a situation where I could give back to society. So having this house, this safe, stable place to live, is the reason I can go on with my life. It's even, I mean, in some ways I'm as angry as D'Andre, mostly because the 27 years, 9 months and 3 days I spent in prison was for something I didn't do. So not only am I impacted by my criminal history, I'm impacted by a history I didn't earn. And I was fortunate enough when I came out to have a friend who's been really helpful. And he said, Hilton, don't worry, I got you. And unlike when most people say, I got you, he really had me. He put money in my account. He said, this will cover first and last. So go find yourself a place to live. Every place I went, I want to be upfront. I want to live a life of an authentic life. So I don't want to start out a situation by lying. So I tell the landlord, I tell the super, listen, I was in prison. I didn't do it, but I spent X amount of years in prison, but I have the money. And I have, at the time I had a job, so I can pay the rent. And I was turned down. I tried probably half a dozen places. But then I said, well, maybe I can get a room somewhere. Yeah. Even though a room is $800 to $1,000 in somebody else's house and you have to share a bathroom and share a kitchen, that was preferable to being on the street. I couldn't even get a room. So my reality is this. Right now I'm living in the Fortune Society's place. I graduate in May. This is supposed to be transitional housing. So they need me to get the hell out so somebody else who's just coming out of prison can move in and have a place to lay their head at night that's safe. I can't seem to find a place will accept me. And it's not just me, it's other people. There's people with vouchers that can't find spaces. You know, FEPS vouchers, Section 8. They can't find a place to live because landlords won't take it. So this bill is important to me because it impacts me, but more so it impacts my community. It impacts Black and brown people more than it affects pretty much anybody else. So that's why I'm here today.
And thank you so much for that testimony, Hilton, as well as Devon and Reverend Harrigan. It's important, right, for people to note the struggles that people who have justice-involved histories go through to access housing. And you who are viewing this and a part of this Facebook town hall can join on to the movement to end that kind of discriminatory practice. You talked about, Hilton, giving back to society. And invariably, we know most people, when coming out of prison, majority just want to give back, especially after serving long sentences in prison. But they need somewhere safe to stay, to be able to build off of the inspiration to give back to the communities. So the Fair Chance Housing Act creates the opportunity for people to do that by ending discriminatory practices as it relates to housing. Yesterday, I actually testified at a NYCHA hearing, and I heard the testimonies of many residents, all of which had real value and real impact because they were scared. And so the idea of public safety is central to the Fair Chance Housing work too, because we are interested in making sure people are safe too. And by housing people and not discriminating against people, you actually contribute to public safety. At this time, I want to also talk about and bring on someone who's also been fully invested in this work, because we know that in order to move things along, to get things codified, to make sure people are held accountable to the decisions they make that negatively impact others, especially as it relates to housing, we need elected officials to sponsor, to support, to introduce, to push along, and to hold their colleagues accountable and get buy-in from them to justify legislation being passed. We know we need an elected official. And so we had someone who stepped out and made sure that they wanted to see this through. And one of the council members who's been instrumental in supporting the Fair Chance Housing Act from its very beginning is none other than Councilmember Stephen Levin. Councilmember Levin started his career by running a Lead Safe for Housing program and an anti-predatory lending program, both in the Bushwick section of Brooklyn. Councilmember Levin worked with local elected officials and advocacy groups. Councilmember Levin was able to galvanize the community against the predatory lending practices that were decimating the neighborhood with foreclosures. He is currently the chair of the General Welfare Committee, which has jurisdiction over New York City Human Resources Administration, the Department of Social Services Administration for Children's Services, and the Department of Homeless Services and other agencies. He is currently championing the Fair Chance for Housing Act, Intro 2047, to end discrimination based on people's conviction records. Councilmember Levin, thank you so much for joining us. Please share some words with us and our audience to share why the Fair Chance for Housing Act is so important.
Thank you, Andre. I want to thank you. Hilton, Devon, Reverend White-Harrigan. Thank you. To me, this is one of the two most top priorities for me. I'm out of office in about 10 and a half months. And so for 2021, my two top priorities are a bill that will raise the city FEPS level to Section 8 levels because it underpays by about $300 or $400, and so you can't even get an apartment. There are thousands of people that have, as Devon said, there's thousands of people that have city FEPS vouchers that can't find an apartment because the city FEPS voucher pays well below market rate. And so we have a bill that's Intro 146. So it's a different bill, but I have that bill and I have 2047, or two bills that are my two top priorities before I leave office. And it's because, people have a right to housing. You have a right to a long-term permanent apartment. And we can't call ourselves the greatest city in the world, the greatest city in the country, or even a halfway equitable city, or even, you know, worthy of looking at ourselves in the mirror, if we can't afford everybody in our city a safe and decent place to live. We are not worthy of what we say about ourselves if we can't do that. And you know, there's over the last few years, we've seen it instead of city FEPs, because, you know, there's Section 8, there's FEPs, there's city FEPs, there used to be a LINK program, there used to be Advantage programs to help people by providing some rental subsidy to stay in an apartment in New York. Over the last couple of years, the city has rolled out this program called SODA. It's called Special One-Time Assistance Program. And we fought to get some data on how many people are using SODA. And it turns out that there are just as many people that are getting a SODA subsidy as they are a city FEP subsidy. And SODA is where they pay for people to move out of the city, go to New Jersey, go to Connecticut, go to Virginia, go to Maryland, go to wherever. It basically is it. And what it indicates to me is that the city basically is saying, we're not even going to try to make New York City a place of opportunity, or a place where people can make it, can invest their lives, can contribute to their communities. And so, you know, I'm inspired to hear Devon and Hilton tell your stories, but it makes me angry that both of you are accomplishing amazing things right now in your lives, and the city is not recognizing that. And the city in our government and our society is not looking at that and saying, we honor that contribution by affording you just a decent, safe place to live. And so it makes me angry. And so these are two bills that I don't think that they'll solve everything, but they are, to me, they're the least that we can do. And just one thing that I can say is that when about a year and a half ago, when I met with a gentleman, Salik Kareem, who came to my office and kind of sat down and pitched this bill idea to me. If asked if I wanted to be a sponsor of the bill. And to me, I didn't have to think twice about it. And I am so honored to have been asked to be the sponsor of this bill. And to me, I feel a you know, I don't say like a religious obligation, but I feel like an obligation deep in my soul to get this bill and to get Intro 146 across the finish line before I leave, because I feel that this is I wouldn't be able to really look at myself in the future and say that I did everything that I could with the gifts that I've been given and the opportunity that I've been given serving in the city council to make good on that. And so I just am so appreciative of this coalition for really stepping out and making this such a moral case for legislation. And so I'm just so appreciative to be a part of it. And one last thing I just want to say about the bill, there are a number of other bills around the country that have done similar things in different cities. This is the best one, and I don't take any credit for that, because it was the group that has been working on this legislation and working with the New York City Human Rights Commission on crafting this bill language. I take no credit for this, but this is the best one. This is the cleanest one. It is the most straightforward. It is the most comprehensive. It doesn't have a lot of its, if you read it right now, it's just a page because it doesn't have a lot of caveats. It doesn't say, well, some people you can do a background check and some people it's saying, no, you can't do it. And everybody has a right to housing. So thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, Councilman Levin, we really thank you for your leadership and supporting and sponsoring this bill and moving it along. And we know we still have a lot of work to do. Some of your colleagues has to be urged and pushed a little bit more to join on to this. And the Fair Chance for Housing Coalition will continue to put the pressure on because this is critically important and indispensable to the work that we need to do to make sure people are not discriminated against. And just acknowledging the fact, thanking Devon, Devon, and thanking Hilton, and thanking Reverend Sharon White-Harrigan, each of whom have experienced like discrimination. It's important, it's important, it's important. We want to transition now to our last panelist. And I know Councilmember Levin talked about not religion, but it's deep in your soul. And we have one Reverend that we spoke about already, Reverend Sharon White-Harrigan, but we have another Reverend to close us out. And this Reverend obviously is a strong and powerful leader too, does great work in the Bronx and other communities as well, but she's based in the Bronx with our organization. I speak of none other than Reverend Wendy Calderón-Payne. And so Reverend Wendy Calderón-Payne is the executive director of Bronx Connect. Fiery, fierce, many of us know her, most of us, a lot of us know her. But Bronx Connect is a community and faith-based program that offers alternative justice, cure violence, and reentry programs to help communities build from within. She is also a member of Faith Communities for Just Reentry, a diverse coalition of interfaith leaders who believe in our neighbors released from New York City's jails must be treated justly. Following Reverend Wendy Payne, we're going to get into some brief Q&A as I know Tom is moving along. But Reverend Wendy Calderón-Payne, thank you so much for joining this town hall. And why is the Fair Chance Housing Act important to you?
So thank you guys. I'm going to try to be quick so we can get to those questions and answers. But if anyone knows me, we actually have Bronx Connect, Manhattan Connect, and now we've started Philly Connect, and we have a very robust reentry program. We come from a faith background where it says that we're supposed to take care of the least of these. And I stand with Councilmember Levin when we say we call ourselves a progressive city. So if we call ourselves a progressive city, we should have progressive laws. So I really take a problem with people who are working, who have the ability to pay for an apartment, who have the deposit, who have the fees and all that stuff. And they are still not allowed, excuse me, I have noise in my house. They're still not allowed to get an apartment because of something that they did or perhaps didn't even do 20 years ago. And they're paying, like they've already paid their dues to society. They were incarcerated. So they should be welcomed into our community. They should be supported so that they can move on with their lives. And I just want to say one thing. My mother used to say that children need a safe place to live so they can concentrate on everything else. So if we see that, Hilton may have a family member, people may have children that are caught up in this craziness, that if you don't, I lost you guys for a second, that if you don't provide proper housing or if you allow people to discriminate, it's just unacceptable. And it's really, I always go back to, if we call ourselves a just city, we are Democratic run, we say we're progressive, then why are we doing these laws that favor, really don't favor, it just doesn't make any sense. And I'm going to say for that intro 146, I think that we need to do a research over the last 10 years to see where the unused city FEPS money went every year in the budget. I want to know who took advantage. I don't even know the process. Like what happens with an unused $10 billion? Who uses that? So this is my problem, is that how do we create a system that we tell people you've paid your dues, you're coming to society, and then, oh, by the way, you have to be homeless. That's ridiculous. And I will say this, I've looked at the numbers myself, because of city FEPS, we actually had to buy a building to provide for somebody. It was just crazy, but it was beyond me that this that a family's voucher is worth $56,000 a year when I could buy and pay a mortgage on a 4-family house for under $56,000 a year. So I thought somebody's making money off of us, but they're making money off of my tax money. It's not politicians' money, it's my tax money, and it's unfair, it's unjust, and it should make every progressive person and politician at night, they shouldn't sleep at night. They should say, no, this has got to be done before I leave office this year. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. We really, really appreciate that. Reverend Wendy Calderón-Payne, thank you for your leadership and your work and commitment, and thank you for all of our panelists. You know, at this time, however, we want to make sure that you, the viewing audience, has the opportunity to ask questions. We'll field those questions by way of the chat that some of you have placed questions in already or sent questions to. And the first question from the audience is from Doug Evans, from John Jay College, ISLG. What research supports the fair chance for housing proposal? And that's for anyone to answer on the panel. Like, what research supports the fair chance for housing proposal?
Well, a lot of studies, well, I'm Devon Nash, a lot of studies were done, and the actual research shows just, how many people are homeless, what it's costing, and just for a cost effect reason alone, that, the city is spending this amount of money each month, almost $200 million each month. That money can be allocated to other services like schools, parks, a lot of other things, just because. So just on that alone, on the cost effectiveness alone, it's saving taxpayers money. I mean, if you can give, it's over 56,000 homeless people in New York City alone, and at the rate of $3,156.52, I mean, one person represents a house, a mortgage. I mean, I seen a condo for right now. The city has already paid $240,000 for me and my nephew to be in here for over 3 years. I could have got a 2-bedroom condo for $227,000. So right there, it could have saved the city somewhere around $16,000, $17,000. So just on a cost effect reason alone, that's enough.
Sure. Anyone else? And there's research, bodies of research that is out there that supports the need for fair chance housing and how housing stability for someone who's recently released portends a greater degree of success for them and them not re-entering back into prisons or jails. We know that over 50% of the people that are leaving New York State prisons are entering into shelter systems. And as Hilton described, those places are unfit for human beings to live in and function in a way to support their means to live a life of contribution and success. So there's research out there. And I don't know, Hilton, you have your hand up. Do you have an answer too around research that supports fair chance housing proposal?
Well, I mean, I'm not quite sure of the exact research, but I deal from things basically on a common sense level. Now, I know when I came out of prison, I couldn't find a place to stay. So I had an option: do the right thing or do the wrong thing. The wrong thing, I'm very well adapted. I might not have gone to prison exactly for what I was charged with, but I'm very far from being a saint. So it would have been very easy. I mean, I have a degree in history, but I've taken an awful lot of chemistry classes. So I think you can all see where I could go with my chemistry skills. And there's a market for that. And I'm sure those kind people that would be useful using my chemistry skills would be more than helpful to find me a place to live and probably pay for it. But that's not the way I chose to go. The reality is based on what the Reverend sister said, is that a place to live is a fundamental human right. From with that right, you can aspire to everything else. I mean, if you look at the society that we come back into, that I come back into, and you want to bring race into it, I will, if nobody else will. If you look at just getting a job in this city, is that a white person with a criminal history has a better chance of getting a job than a black or a brown person with exactly the same qualifications. So, okay, I'm black and I have to deal with that because of just the race. Now you add the conviction to that. Then you add my age, as you can see the gray hairs. You just keep compounding weight upon weight upon weight. And the easiest thing in life to do, and I'm sure everybody knows this, is to do what you've always done because you're familiar with it. Change is far more hard, it's far more difficult, and requires a lot more effort.
Thank you for that, Hilton. And I know that Reverend Wendy obviously had put something in the chat, which is very, very important, obviously. And we want to make sure that you go to www.fairchancehousing.org. You can find information there. You can go to the Fair Chance Housing Coalition website too to find information and data and research that supports what we're advancing here. And that is to ensure that people are not discriminated against because of their legal histories. And so there's another question that's in the chat from Richard Bonomo from the Church of Heavenly Rest. And good evening to you, Richard. What is the history and rationale behind subsidized housing not being available to recently formerly incarcerated people? And anyone on this panel could answer that question. Thank you for that question, Richard.
So I can answer that. So Pastor Bonono, I actually don't, I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right, but Pastor, I think if we can understand that the action of penalizing people for being formally incarcerated really stems out of the 1990s, when there was a strong movement to punish people, 3 strikes you're out, getting people off of welfare or public assistance. And it was really a movement that punished people who were poor. So if you had a really good lawyer, if you were middle class, you could be arrested for the same thing that if you didn't have a good lawyer, you didn't have a paid lawyer, and you were darker, black or Hispanic, you'd actually go to jail. So we need to understand that this whole movement of background checks or penalizing people in poverty came out of the 1990s. And it's actually things that we recently have actually said, politicians on the left and the right have said, this is wrong. This was not good. We've had people nationally apologize for it. And I thought, well, that's great, but we've had a generation of Black men incarcerated. What are you going to do about that? So we have to think about that. The other thing about background checks, if you've ever heard of anyone who's been like falsely accused on a background check, because of the internet, background checks are very, like arrest records are very easily secured and marketed as a background check. So there are a lot of times that background checks are not correct, but anyone can get one for $35. You can get somebody's background check. You can even get it without their permission. You can fake their permission. So we need to understand that a lot of landlords use it thinking that it's going to protect them, but in fact, it's not going to protect them. A lot of crimes happen, whether, in fact, if you want to think about it to make society better, people are less prone to do things that brought them to jail if they have secure housing. And if you really actually talk to people who've come out of incarceration, they just want to work. That's it. They just want to work. They want to see their kids. They want to eat their own meals. So I think this is where it's come from. It's also a market that sprang up. I've heard reports of people knowing people's like arrest records from like a DWI arrest that didn't even end in a conviction, but threatening or blackmailing people that I'm going to publish this. It's really bad. So that's where it's come from.
Thank you for that, Reverend Wendy. And we also have a few other questions. These are 2 related questions from Pastor Rex Duvall and Jacob Swartz. And Pastor Rex Duvall asks, many of those still incarcerated have actually done their time, still cannot be released because they don't have an address. Like, how can we address this travesty? And Jacob Swartz asks, and I see you, Hilton, does the Fair Chance Housing agenda include any efforts to reform the Sexual Assault Reform Act, which essentially and effectively bars most people required to register as sex offenders from living in most of New York City, and frequently forces those people into homelessness? And so I'll turn it over, Hilton. I know you had your hand up for the first question. And if any of other panelists have a response to Jacob Schwartz's question, please do answer. And if not, right there, again, on the Fair Chance for Housing website, you'll be able to find documents and information, right, that speaks to some of these questions that folk are answering. Hilton?
Yes, I want to speak to the strange anomaly of men and women that are incarcerated. When I was in Attica and Wendy and also correctional facilities, I was counted as a resident of those counties, which increased the representation of those counties. So Wyoming County did real well, and Ulster County did real well. Since when I left prison, I didn't have a place to go. I didn't have a place, mother was dead, father was dead. There was no place for me to go. They sent me to the shelter, to the Bellevue shelter. That was on my release papers that I had to report there. That's the only time I was homeless. New York State does not consider people who are incarcerated, who don't have a place to stay, as homeless. They are considered domiciled in the prison they are. Once you're released, you become homeless. Now, to get any services, you have to stay in the shelter. In the city's voucher, you have to stay in the shelter for a long enough period of time to qualify for it. I've never understood that logic behind the system. It doesn't make any sense to me, but that's the reality. So I have to be homeless before I can get a place to stay, which means I have to stay in a shelter. This is unsafe. It's just crazy. I don't know what else to say about it.
Sure. And Reverend Harrigan White? Sure.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is to eradicate parole, right? Because it's parole that you really need an address for in order to be released. So if we get rid of that, then that would be one of, the many things that is needed. And I think also the other thing is reentry should start at entry, right? The moment that a person gets incarcerated, that all systems, right? All the community, everything, it starts there. So by the time a person is released, there shouldn't be anyone that doesn't have a roof over their head to go to once they are released. So, it's a matter of creating a short, clean pathway to permanent housing once a person gets incarcerated.
And I could speak, Andre, to the second question. So this bill doesn't address issues around the sex offender registry. That's state law, and so this is we're doing whatever we can here with city law, and so that's how we're going about this in the council. But it doesn't really include anything around. And nothing in this bill undoes any state law. So that really needs to be a conversation at the state level with the state legislature. I just want to say follow up one thing that Hilton mentioned around having to go into shelter in order to get a voucher. We do have also another bill that would cut down on that time, because and especially for people on the street, they have to be seen. It's over the course of 9 months to be considered long-term unsheltered, and so it is a total travesty that people have been talking about this for years, and nobody has really done anything about it. And then one last thing, just about the city has been complaining for years. I've been chair of this committee for 7 years. And the city has complained because the number of single adults in the shelter system has steadily increased over the last 10 years. And when you ask the administration, the city, why is that happening? They'll say, well, state corrections is discharging people without a permanent address and discharging people into the shelter system. However, when you ask the city, well, what resources then have you set up, the city, for people coming out of prisons? They say the Fortune Society. Oh, there's but there's transitional housing at the Fortune Society. Well, how many beds does the Fortune Society have? Not a lot. And so they complain about it. They spend the thousands of dollars a month for people to be in shelter instead of actually building up programs like the Fortune Society. It can be with the Fortune Society, but you can't rely entirely on the Fortune Society. And so it is maddening, and it all has to do, I mean, I don't want to get on my soapbox about this, but it all has to do with who's calling the shots. And it's always the Office of Management and Budget that calls the shots. And they only do what they think they can get federal money for or state money for. And it's all about shifting around resources like that. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and I wanted to just respond to one of the questions that was answered around the sex offense related question. And, 95% of sex crimes are committed by people who don't have prior sex convictions. So screening tenants for sex offense convictions is not an effective way really to prevent crime or a real effective crime prevention method. And so while residency restrictions really seem to have intuitive appeal, like research has shown that residency restrictions are not effective in preventing sex crimes. We believe that everyone deserves access to housing. Making people with sex offenses homeless does not make anyone safer. And then we have one more question here. The next question is from Margaret Desarega, right? And hi, Margaret, it's good to hear from you. And so she's from the Vera Institute. And she asks, what is an example of what effective enforcement has looked like for fair chance ordinances? How are private landlords being brought along to support new background check policies?
So I'm going to say that I don't know. I think maybe somebody else could actually officially answer that question, but I will say that all over the Bronx, people are violating this rule. I mean, literally, what they do is you call up and you say, I want to know if there's apartments available. And they say, well, what kind of voucher do you have? And the minute you say FEPS, they say, we don't have any apartments available. I've heard people say like, oh, after the city council passed those laws about how much you could increase them, oh, we're not taking vouchers anymore. And I think like, I can't believe that you're doing this. So I do know that there is a city agency that does sting operations, but they don't do them in the Bronx, or they're not getting done enough in the Bronx. So it is just so obvious that the minute you say to them, you do an application, but the minute you have to disclose that it's a FEPS voucher or a Section 8 voucher or whatever it is, oh, we don't have any apartments available. So
One thing that the City Commission on Human Rights has been doing lately, and this has been pretty effective, but they've only been doing it for a little while, is they're working with some nonprofits, and if the nonprofit is working with a client and they're getting denied, what's happening with what Reverend Wendy just mentioned, where they'll say they'll take an application and then all of a sudden they'll say we don't have an apartment available. They'll feed that case to the Commission on Human Rights. Commission on Human Rights will just pick up the phone, call the landlord, let them know that they're going to open up a case, and they have two options. They could either let them proceed with a case, which can be costly and lengthy and end up with being a major headache for that landlord, or they can abide by the law and not, because it is illegal. And so that's been the tactic that they've been taking lately. Instead of trying to spend the years it takes to prosecute all of these cases, they'll call them up and say, you can do the right thing right now. And that's been more effective just in the last year or two that they've been doing it.
And thank you for that answer, and thank you for that question, Margaret. And enforcement of this particular bill will be part of the city's human rights laws, as the council member referenced. And so enforcement and penalties will be the same as other forms of discrimination. Like someone could file a lawsuit or just make a complaint to the Commission of Human Rights, right? And so when the commission finds that a landlord has discriminated, right, they obviously can enforce that, they can follow up, and they can make sure that things are addressed. And so we want to make sure that people are obviously being dealt with in a way that's fair. A landlord is discriminated, they can require landlords to change their policies. The other part of it too is that effective enforcement also includes testing rather than just relying on people to make complaints. And in terms of bringing landlords along for years, many landlords, as you think about it, or rather many organizations have tried to educate users of background checks about the problems with them. And so this is tremendous information, or rather there's tremendous information showing how often they're wrong. And so we want to make sure that, you know, people know about this, and we want to make sure that, again, landlords are being held accountable for those things. And this last question is from Christian Edwards from the Women's Community Justice Project. So this is for Councilmember Levin. What do you see as the timing for getting a vote on the bill? And relatedly, from Taber Benedict, what are the most significant roadblocks or barriers to getting the Fair Chance for Housing bill passed and made into law? And thank you, Christian and Taber, for those questions. Councilmember Levin?
So I'm hopeful that this bill can be passed by this summer. And that might seem like a long time, but it's, you know, bills take a while to get through the council, at least most bills do. And I think that the biggest obstacle is really just getting this bill to get the kind of public profile that I think it deserves, and that I think that it should have, and that it will have. And so that's one reason why I'm excited to be part of this panel, and I really appreciate everyone that's worked on putting this panel together tonight, is really getting the word out there that this is a bill that has it's a good bill. It has a good chance of passing. We have 21 sponsors on the bill right now out of 51. That means that we have 30 sponsors that we could still get. But we have people that have kind of crossed across the ideological spectrum, and we have kind of what we consider like more moderate and more conservative members of the council, so not just progressives. And I think that really just getting the word out. I really think that getting the word out, making people understand. I'm having a meeting tomorrow with the Association of Realtors to make sure that they know what the bill is and why it's important. I've talked to Rebney about it. I've talked to RSA about it. You know, I think that what I would love to see is having, you know, it's really getting this out there and getting a movement behind this bill. But I think it's going to pass no matter what. But I think if we could get that movement out there and really get the word out, I know that a number of people that are listening to the panel today and on the panel have been part of these movements before. Looking at Reverend Wendy, I know, so going back and these, and actually it's the faith community has always been really instrumental on getting, when I look back at like living wage bill or paid sick leave, you know, these bills that really took some heavy lifting. It was the faith community often that really put the word out there and said this is a moral issue for the city.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have two more questions, final two questions. One is from Victor M. Herrera. And Victor states, like, the fair chance housing relates to convictions. However, what about other checks, such as credit reports that include information that impact housing for individuals reentering the community? And thank you for that question, Victor.
I'll take it.
Sure.
I think that the Fair Chance Housing is working, you know, they're working to make sure that this bill addresses a part of this, parts of this, and the landlords would not be able to consider criminal record related fines and fees that appear on a credit check. However, you're right, like a credit check is also a major barrier, right, for formerly incarcerated people, as many have no credit, which is just as bad, having bad credit. But because of criminal justice related fees and debt, some barriers have been partially removed, right? In 2019, the New York State set the maximum amount that could be charged for background and credit checks to $20 per application. The Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD, also changed their policy for the city's affordable housing lottery in 2019. And people have the option to forego a credit check and can instead choose to provide evidence of 12 months of rent payments. However, most other landlords can and still do credit checks, and we recognize that this is just another issue, barrier, obstacle that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Reverend Harrigan. I think there's this last question. This is from Ebros Lamastu. And I apologize for not pronouncing your name correctly. Lamashtu. There are small numbers of us who are formerly incarcerated and undocumented, thus don't qualify for any benefits regarding housing. We're not included in this proposed bill or any other bills. Why is that? And what could be done to help move our situation to true equity and housing justice? And thank you for that question, Erobos.
I mean, it's something that I'll just say that you're right. I mean, it's something that we need to do better on. I mean, this bill doesn't exclude people who are undocumented in the sense that but if people that are undocumented don't have access to benefits or housing benefits and subsidy, then it doesn't really help them. But it does still apply to people whether they're documented or undocumented. Part of the challenge it goes back to this issue of who ends up paying for it, and the city put so much emphasis on getting federal dollars, and often the federal dollars come with these restrictions. If it's city dollars itself, then there shouldn't be any restrictions about who can receive it. But if it comes with attached federal dollars, then often these restrictions are on there.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer, Councilmember Levin. And we want to thank you for your commitment to this work, as well as all of our panelists. And as we begin to close, we want to thank everyone who joined us on Facebook Live today. Your presence, your support is extremely important to this movement and to this action and to the coalition. We thank all of our panelists, Devon Nash, Reverend Sharon White-Harrigan, Hilton Webb, Reverend Wendy Calderón-Payne. And we want to give you some actions to do now. And so we want you to get involved and take action by going to www.fairchancehousing.org /take action. That's again, go to www.fairchancehousing.org /take action. You can sign the petition, you can send an email to your council member, or tweet at your council member, all in a few clicks. We'll also put this in the Facebook chat. Again, we want you to take action and join with us in collaboration and in partnership to make sure that we end discriminatory practices by passing the Fair Chance for Housing Act. To stay up to date, follow the campaign on Twitter and Instagram at fairhousing_NYC. That's fairhousing_NYC. If you have any additional questions that weren't answered, please email Zoe Johnson at zjohnson@jjay.cuny.edu. Again, you can email Zoe Johnson for further questions at zjohnson@jj.cuny.edu. www.cuny.edu. Thanks again to our co-sponsors, the Brooklyn Defender Service, Coalition for the Homeless, Common Justice, Exodus Transitional Community, Faith Communities for Just Reentry, the Fortune Society, Freedom Agenda at the Urban Justice Center, John Jay College Institute for Justice and Opportunity, the Legal Aid Society, Mental Health Project at the Urban Justice Center, and the Osborne Association. The recording of this event will be saved on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you again. My name is Andre Ward, and I serve as your moderator for this event. And make sure that you get involved to pass the Fair Chance Act for Housing this year. Thank you. Have a good evening. Be safe and be well.
God bless you all.